All right. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We have our next investor in the series. So we have a founder and investor series for Rebel One Live, where we review and interview individuals in the impact investing space every week for about a half an hour to an hour, and every Tuesday at 7 p.m. and also Thursdays at 10 a.m. That's Eastern Standard Time. Today, we have Iynna Halilou that is joining us from ERA. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. We'll dive in just for a little bit of background. She's the global programs manager at ERA. She has been an entrepreneur, previously graduate of NYU, focused on international development. And I've known her for a few years around the impact space. So she's quite connected and seasoned in the space, but excited to hear more about what you're working on at ERA, and also how you came to sit in the investing role, and particularly the investing role of an accelerator. So thank you, Iynna, for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. So if you can share a little bit about what ERA is, Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, for the audience.
Sure. Again, thank you so much for having me. This is a really great opportunity for founders and investors to sort of get connected. So really appreciate all the work that you're doing in connecting everyone here. So yeah, happy to share a bit more about what we do. So ERA, which stands for Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, is actually New York's first and largest early stage tech startup accelerator and seed investment fund. So a lot of things that not a lot of people know that, but back in 2008, actually, our two founders, they just exited their last companies. They were thinking about what they wanted to do next. And they realized that, well, it was a time when the economy was, very interesting time. And so they were seeing a lot of people basically, quitting their jobs and not really wanting to go back to work in corporate. And then they were really excited about starting something new. But at the time, New York was very, very, desert as far as what's happening in the investing space in the early stage entrepreneurship. There was a lot of resources for growth stage in entrepreneurs, but not so much for early stage. So they thought that this was a gray area where they could actually they could tap into that space. And so they started by creating a nonprofit called Entrepreneurs Roundtable. And those were a series of events where they brought in entrepreneurs and investors in a roundtable format. And so people would come in and talk about the challenges, and they will receive feedback and so on and so forth. So that was back in 2008. And fast forward all the way until today, we're running those events every month, every usually first Tuesday of the month, called Entrepreneurs Roundtable. And we've launched, we've had our 140th event back in March. And this month was actually the very first time we had to cancel for obvious reasons in the history of the Entrepreneurs Roundtable. So we're very excited, and this has been a very great opportunity for us to really get connected to the community and really being a stakeholder in the New York ecosystem. But then so fast forward, we realized that, there was a great opportunity for us to actually create a structure around those events. And that's how in 2011, we decided to create the Accelerator. So initially the idea was, let's give some money to founders, but instead of just giving them money and, see them go, we actually wanted to create a support system behind that would actually help them, grow their businesses. And so that's how we decided to run the Accelerator. And now today we've run 18 classes. So every year we run 2 classes, so one in the summer and one in the winter. Each class is 4 months. We make direct investment of $100,000. We take 8% equity, and we help companies. It's very, very hands-on. So in addition to the actual monetary investment, there's an actual investment as far as resources, network. We have one of the largest mentors network of all accelerators. And because we are also sector agnostic, we're really able to really tap into our network and really support companies anywhere from fintech to logistics to retail tech, real estate tech, and you name it. And now that New York is really becoming very, very big tech hub, we can we have really get access to a lot of different companies in different industries.
Great. And right now, you do investments primarily. Can you talk a little bit more about the program? Do you require participants when they get 100K to come to New York?
Yeah.
Do you consider, like what's the duration of the program and cadence of programming and things like that? Can you share a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's great because with us, so we run an application program. Companies apply, and then when they get selected, we do require them to move to New York and basically to move physically into our space. So the ERA office is actually run like a co-working space, but in that co-working space, all of the companies that you see all have an ERA affiliation. So it's very much like a big ERA house. So everyone in the space is an ERA company. So there is that connection. And again, to kind of like we really emphasize on that community and that network. And so the program, like I said, is a 4-month program, and so very, very, very intense. So month one is very focused on, discovery of the market, and then really kind of like dive more into actually, growth, and kind of like maybe launching the product, depending on where the companies are. So to date, most of the, we've had about 200 companies, and to date, about 90% of those companies are all American companies. So those are companies that either are from New York or are from somewhere in the US. And about 10% of those are actually international companies. So we've had founders coming from Turkey, Israel, Australia, South Africa, Denmark, Venezuela, Canada, Colombia, Brazil. I'm forgetting a few, but pretty much very, very global. And because we saw that a lot of companies globally were very excited about the US market, but we couldn't accept everyone. We decided that we wanted to create a separate program that would really be geared towards those global companies that are very excited about entering the US market and understanding a bit more. And so that's why back in 2015, we decided to create an ERA Global, which I'm now actually running in my capacity. And with ERA Global, what we do is that we apply the same tenet of the ERA program, but we really want to focus on more scale-up companies. So companies that already have, traction in their existing market, they have customers, they have some revenue. We don't have any revenue minimum, but at least they have basically built out a model that is replicable. And now they're thinking about how can we expand that to the US market. We don't have the knowledge, we don't have the immersion, we don't have the network. How can we, do that? And so ERA Global is very positioned as that partner, really being able to support those companies, in making that entry. So it's an acceleration program on the go-to-market. So really figuring out what is that makes me successful at home that I can apply or I can ditch to be successful in the US as well.
Got it. And when you're focusing on, so you have the two programs, the New York Accelerator and this the global program, right? And what are the things you're looking for? We'll start with the New York Accelerator. What stage do they need to be? What type of traction? Again, it's $10,000, 8% in the the It might seem a little. 100,000, sorry. 100,000. Yeah, that makes a big difference. Big difference. Yeah. 100,000, 8%. They might think it's a little steep. Can you walk through like what stage is the right stage for a founder that's making that leap with you all?
That's a great question. And we get that a lot, actually. And so, and it's interesting, especially as I'm sure you've seen, the way, VC and the way startup has very much evolved here in New York. Now we have over 7,000 startup here in New York. So the concept of which stage is very, now when you talk about early stage, is very, what is early stage really?
Yes, yeah.
So with us, what we look for, and you'll see that it's not so different between ERA NYC and ERA Global, but there's obviously some nuances which I'll touch on. With ERA NYC, what we really focus on is really the team. So we really believe in people. We are early stage investors. We typically are the first investor in a company. So we very much believe into team when there is there is really no traction to show. Either barely launched or maybe you've launched and we've seen some signs of hustle and traction. This is really what we're looking for. We're looking for great teams, and what we call great are people that either have domain expertise. So if we have a real estate company, does the founders have some knowledge in real estate? We're looking for founders that have real, there is some signs of hustling and execution. So can we see, can they determine, can they demonstrate that they can really, act upon what they have to do to act upon the challenges, and they'll react fast. So that's what we kind of like testing. Obviously, we're also looking at the market in which they are. Is it a big market? Is it defendable? We're looking at the products, what's the product that they're looking to launch? Is it something that we believe will be successful, down the line? Ultimately, we are VC, we believe in growth. So we're looking at some, companies that will go big eventually, and that we can really help. And the other thing as well that we look for is, generally speaking, when you talk about traction, kind of like where they are. So that's where it gets very interesting, because like in our portfolio, you can see companies that literally came with nothing. And when I say nothing, it was something, maybe a mock-up on a piece of paper. And that sounds very cliche, but unfortunately very true. But also we've had companies that already had, launch and already had revenue. So we had companies that had 1 million in revenues, ARR. Other companies had, barely launch. So those are kind of like the two extreme. And we tend to have, gravitate around somewhere in the middle. But so obviously a bit of traction always helps, but typically companies have not necessarily received investment before, or if they've done something is a friend and family round, but no equity round before. And so the goal is to really help them, get to the next level of investment, and that's kind of like what they get out of the program as well, meeting investors and so on and so forth. So that's on the ERA side, ERA invoicing side.
Okay. And for the startups on the spectrum, of course, the 100 million ARR, obvious what the, like they float to the top of the pile. But for the ones that are earlier in their concept, what makes those companies stand out?
Absolutely, and that's definitely a great one. When we look, and I think that's kind of like the psychology of VCs when they say, "I just really like the founder." Well, yes, but why? How? Yep. So, and I think that's when the story, and that's where I think that it's very important, and that's a big advice that I will give to any entrepreneurs that is listening to this. It's kind of like really nail down the story that you have with your company, obviously, and what you're trying to build, but also your own story. What makes you the best person to be building this? So why are you now coming out today? You decided to drop everything, maybe you left a very comfortable job to do this. Why? It's terrible. It's miserable to be an entrepreneur. We all know that. But so why are you doing this? And so we really owning that story and really making sure that you show that either the market very well, that you have specific insight that no one else might have, because you've either had 20 years of experience in this, or maybe because you have a stellar team around you, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where this idea around the team is very, very important, and really the founders, and how where they see themselves and what makes them different, because especially in the US, chances are if you're trying to build something, someone else has done it before. So what makes you different than all of those people before that have done it, either succeeded or failed?
Yeah, and for got it. So it's a lot on the team, and the experience of the team gives that weight, ranking higher in the list. And the $100,000 that you put in, how many startups do you invest in at a time, and how many times a year?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So we run, like I said, 2 programs a year. So those are, one in the summer. So we actually currently running, we're finishing wrapping up our winter class, and the summer class will be starting in July. And so we take anywhere from 10 to 14 companies at a time. Okay. So we make an investment in 10 to 14 companies, and we keep our programs quite small, relatively small, because again, we very much want to focus on having the right fits, and having the right type of people for the community, and the type of support that we can provide to them.
Got it. So over the course of the year, you're deploying anywhere between $2 to $3 million into these companies coming in. And then do you also, in terms of fund strategy, are you also investing in follow-on rounds, or do you have capital reserve there? Can you talk a little bit about how you decide to invest in follow-on rounds or not?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So actually, one of the things that we do as well is that, so obviously we make that first investment, the 100K, and then they go through the program. But the other way that ERA literally stays invested in a company, is, we continue to give support, and even when they graduate from the program, they continue to, companies still up to date, come to us for any question. We have all of our, channels of communication very open, but also we do make follow-on investments. So we participate into follow-on rounds. We never lead rounds because we don't want to have any sort of like any kind of like conflict or, kind of like preference in any ways. We love all of our companies, but we do do a follow-on investment as well. Yeah, we have actually kind of like an expansion fund that is very much reserved for that.
And how big is that expansion fund?
So it's actually about the same as the Accelerator fund.
Okay.
So we have about 50 million AUM.
Okay.
That's,
Got
if
it.
my memory serves me well, and we are currently looking for raising the next fund. So
Great.
fun. Yeah.
Great. No,
Fun times to do that.
yeah, fun. Yes, intense times to do that. But yeah, I wanted to touch on what you just said in follow-on rounds. Can you share a little bit more about when because if you've invested, and I just want to pull it out for people that are watching that it's new. If you're making that first investment of $100,000 for 8%, you're a sort of a lead investor, right? At that point.
Right.
And then you wouldn't lead a follow-on round because that presents a conflict that you choose the next valuation when, of course, you're incented to increase the valuation. So that's just a wrinkle explaining for people new to the investing game and why you wouldn't do that. But wanted to shift back to you, and can you share a little bit now? I know we've talked about ERA, the ERA program. Can you talk about the program you lead, the global program, and how do you select startups? Like, how many do you deal with? What size investments do you make? If you can give light.
Absolutely. So no, that's great. Those are all great. So with ERA Global, like I said, we know we focus a bit more on when I say scale up companies from globally, but again, scale up takes a very different definition depending on which market you look at. So sometimes we've actually had companies that where already had 20 million in revenue, other companies that had about 2 million in revenue. So we don't really put a number around kind of like what we look for. We look for, again, very important teams. So we look for teams that, again, have the knowledge. They are coachable. That's actually very important because they will be receiving very new feedback. The chances are they've been running their businesses before, so they will have to kind of kill some of their assumptions. So they need to be built strongly to understand that sometimes things won't work out. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we kind of like want to focus more on that coachability element. And the other thing as well that we look for is obviously companies that have built something that is that is scalable and can be successful in the US, so it makes sense for the US market. And also we want to see how successful they've been already in their existing markets. So that's kind of like what we look at. We run 3 programs a year, and those initially when we started, it was more on a rolling basis, kind of like more opportunistically. And then we really was more of a test, and we saw that this became there was a real need around companies. We started seeing a lot of applications, so we decided to kind of like build also like instead of having an ad hoc program, actually very well structured during the year. So we have 3 programs every year. Those are 3-month programs. Those are shorter programs, and actually we do not invest in those programs initially. 2 reasons. We tried to do that and it became very messy very quickly, so we stayed away from it. Number 1 is because it's very difficult from a valuation standpoint to really kind of determine, what's the valuation of each company coming from, let's say, Brazil versus company coming from Belgium. This is very impossible to do. And number 2, because we look at companies that already have more traction, it is most of the time those companies have actually already received investments. So there is a lot of conflict and legal problems that we see. And for us to also be able to invest, they need to be, Delaware incorporated. They need to be, US entities. And so the whole premise of our program is to actually help companies expand into the US. And hopefully help them go through that whole incorporation program. So if we decide that we want them to be incorporated beforehand, that kind of like create a whole, chicken and egg issue. So we decided to stay away from that. So companies actually pay a fee to join the program. And that is a way for us to see that there is some skin in the game. And that they're obviously very serious about the US. And so most of the time, those companies actually already have, they're already committed to the US market, and they want to be in the US. So they have hopefully thought through this and actually allocated a budget for it. So they know that it won't be free. And so it's a matter of, do we want to do this on our own? Or do we want to kind of like see it as an investment in a partner like ERA and actually see a return on that investment down the line? And for us, we do that. Well, it's great for us because we get to work with multiple different companies, but also we are a VC fund, so we want to get access to larger deal flows because we can invest in those companies afterwards if we see that there is a mutual fit, and so forth.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about that because it speaks to ERA's model, right? You talked about having 50 million AUM under management if you have 50 million on both sides, and just to share a little bit about it's like fund strategy, right? And you think about where a lot of these larger funds make most of their money is in investing in larger deals. And then the creative way you all help people do that is you have these international deals that want to come to the US. You help them in building that relationship. You're almost gaining insight into, is this company a good company to invest in, right? And then they get comfortable working with you, and investing down the line is either a natural, it either naturally arises, right? So it's a good fit overall and complements the other program. So and then another point that you talked about, that all on the global side of the house. Can you talk a little bit about how how is it for you serving so many different companies that are at different stages from different places? How do you do that well?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge, but it's a fun challenge, I like to say. So a lot of our companies come from, initially when we started ERA Global, we started seeing a lot of companies from Asia, so particularly Korea, Japan, Taiwan to some extent, and then we started growing more towards Europe. So we had a lot of companies from Belgium, Italy, Norway, Finland, Sweden, now growing to Spain. And then we expanded that also in Latin America. So Brazil, Argentina, also a lot in Mexico, and now also trying to grow Colombia, Chile, Peru, so on and so forth. And one of my biggest also interests is also going down into Sub-Saharan Africa, because that's my background. But so it's definitely very interesting to kind of like see the parallel differences, similarities between founders. So one of the things that we see, and the way we have been able to kind of like manage that, if you will, is to kind of like see in what way the US is unique. And I know that sort of like raises a lot of eyebrows at how, the US, the number one superpower, but the US is such an interesting place to do business, and it's very unique in a sense. So kind of like seeing what are the things that Americans want to see and do, and taking that and almost, and I've kind of like developed an 8-point sort of like, insight that I give to founders when they first arrive, that, this is some things that you just kind of like need to know, how to speak American, what do American want, this whole idea of having an elevator pitch, even the way that you want to schedule your meetings, the type of expectations, how Americans are like on the go, you have to be fast, all of those kind of like things that are very normal for us, but might not be normal for someone coming from Spain or from Italy, where, it's very okay to set up a 1-hour meeting, where, that's just won't happen here. People don't have time. So, kind of like, and we joke a lot about that, but that's something that they need to get used very quickly. And so kind of like seeing, those are the things that, I tell them, you need to know that first. Doesn't matter how you do it back home, this is kind of like how people will expect you to do it here. And so, getting kind of like slowly kind of like leaning, we tell them that it's very important that they retain, obviously the cultural, specificities, because that's what set them apart, but that they kind of like understand, because they have to compete not just against companies in the space in the US, but against all the companies looking for, customers, money from investors, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like how we've been positioning those programs and kind of like how we talk to them.
Oh, that's great. And uh, I wanted to share as you. So how many companies do you help a year, and how does the program element work? Does it mirror the two batches in
Yeah.
ERA, or is it do the two programs like complement? Sorry,
Yeah,
I asked you a few questions. Yeah.
that's definitely no, that's a great question as well, because that's a great way of kind of like talking a bit more about specifically how we support those founders. So when we first started the global programs, we love to kind of like combine those, having combined workshop, because we really believe into that, the power of networking, the power of community, and that's great. That worked really well. But more and more, as we really kind of like growing ERA Global, and as we are seeing that we very, now we know what type of companies we're looking for. We know kind of like the product, what it looks like. We also have specific sessions, as you would expect, for those companies that that wants to kind of like learn a bit more about the US specifically. So, for example, we have sessions around understanding an overview of B2B sales from a US standpoint. We have founders that have done B2B sales in their existing markets, but how to adjust that for the US, it's a completely different story. So how do we have specific sessions. And so while we kind of like we run those two programs, we overlap them, because it's good for our teams. It's good to kind of like combine resources. We also try to make sure that a couple of things are also separate, because the focus is very much on the US go-to market. So the acceleration is not. So I like to give the analogy that the ERA program is very much to grow a seed into a plant, whereas the global program is to take a plant into a different garden. So, adjusting to the environment, adjusting to many things, maybe a company coming from, that has already has a lot of traction in Europe, they might not need to know how to, do an email campaign. They might need, however, help on what type of things they need to focus on. Maybe they need to focus on the product first, what needs to go on the subject line, all those specificities and the neat and grit, that they might need help on that. But the whole idea on why it's important, maybe not. And just to tack on your first question was, what's the frequency? So we run 3 programs a year, and it's even smaller. We run between 6 to 8 companies in those programs, because the programs are very, it's a program, but it's very actually carefully curated to the needs of the companies, because all of them are very different, and they are, more advanced, and they have multiple different needs, and different type of, people that they need to meet, and kind of like network that they need to build. So my job is to kind of like really, to some extent, customize that program to kind of like fit the needs of every company.
Great. I wanted to take a step back, and I know we dived into ERA and ERA Global. Can you share a little bit more about how you ended up leading the global programs?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So my background is actually, it's funny, because when I'm kind of talking to other people in the VC land, it's sort of like, oh, how did you get there? Or people that are trying to break into venture capital, because that's also it's apparently a very hot space now because of tech and all that. And I like to say that, if I've made it into VC, anyone can do it, like literally anyone. So my background is actually from, in the international affairs space. So I went to school, initially I went to school in the UK for political science and international affairs. And my goal was to work for an international organization. Because I wanted to kind of like move back to on the African continent, work in the international development space. Actually wanted to be a journalist, a war reporter initially, but that's kind of like changed along the way. Wanted to work for the UN. So I moved to the US, and I got my master's, and I actually worked for the UN. So everything started at the UN, and I was in the media department, which was very interesting. And then I decided that, I didn't want to be at the UN anymore, and left and did a complete, change of career, and actually moved back to Cameroon and joined a fellowship program to basically start a social enterprise in Cameroon, in the sanitation space. So I focused on, access to toilets for particularly in the, underserved communities in the biggest cities in Cameroon of Douala, which is the economic capital. So really focused on, most of the communities there were, women and kids were really the one that really didn't really get access to toilets. And so it was very interesting to be in that space. Moved back to the US and, co-founded another organization in the edtech space. So that's actually around the time when we met. And so that was to provide STEM education to underrepresented minorities in the kind of like in the New York tri-state area. So while the demographic was very different, I was not necessarily looking at, before I was very into, Africa and that, although it was a different demographic and it was more US centric with that venture, the whole idea of, creating access to opportunities was always what I was, I was always really, that's what I was really into. And so running that startup was very interesting and, it was very difficult. It was very, very painful, but very fun at the same time. So that's when I see people start saying that I want to start my own business, I'm like, why though? Like, why? Is it because you're seeing all, Mark Zuckerberg and making it? Like, is that if that's why you want to be an entrepreneur, then forget about that. That's not a good reason. So yeah, but so that's why it's always very interesting for me. But then running that startup was really interesting. Still, so I took a step back after that. So I was co-founder and CEO. Took a step back after that, and then I was recruited to actually run a social impact accelerator. And so that was fascinating because I got to, coming from, on the founding, scene and kind of like, the whole struggle of, getting customers and fundraising and all that, to running an ecosystem of founders. And so that was fascinating because, as running an accelerator, which was also digital, so all the companies were all over the world. And they were even more early stage than what we do here at ERA. They were, really, some of them had ideas, some of them, had something already. But really this whole concept of, what is that, what you need to have to kind of like get to the next level became really fascinating to me. And I saw that a lot of those companies, were had a lot of potential to receive, to fundraise, but very, very under the radar. And so I became really fascinated into that space of, venture. And I thought to myself, how does one get into the space and kind of like, and I became really, very intrigued into the whole VC landscape. And as a way again of seeing how VCs, I do believe that have a great role and now responsibility in really shaping society and the economy. And so because when you see how literally a group of people really decide, the fate of a company, quite frankly, I mean, that's not the only parameter, but it's a huge parameter. And so we're seeing now a lot of, when we look at companies now in the way that they're growing, some companies are doing very well, some companies not so well. And you kind of, when you look at kind of like who was behind leading those runs, it's very interesting to kind of like see there are some correlations. And, I'm sure people here, are reading the news and it's no secret. But so it's interesting to me now seeing, what's the, what's kind of the new wake up call in the VC world, what's our roles of venture capitalists and what should we do, into helping and to serving companies well. So it's good to focus on growth, but how can we do in a way that is sustainable and actually and supportive of the companies? And so, and that's something that I've also been very proud to see at ERA, that this is something that, with the accelerator, we don't just kind of like dump money. We actually are here to kind of like help them shape their vision. And while we don't take board seats, we are kind of like, invisible board members because they always ultimately come back to us, to ask advice anywhere from should I hire this person to what should I do? We've now, in this current economy in which we are, we are running literally every week. We have, 1 hour calls to kind of like have updates on companies, how they should do, what we should do. We don't want to lay off people. Should we freeze hiring? Kind of discuss all those high level strategy that will ultimately impact the future of the company. So I think that, VCs should, my take on that, and that's just literally my opinion, VCs could really do a bit more on being, support driven as opposed to only capital. And I think we're seeing that shift quite a lot actually with the whole platforms being developed. I think this is a new role that is, growing the VC world, the VC world, the whole idea of, being a platform manager and all that. I think it's great. And so, and I realized that I did completely digress here, but all of that to say that the opportunity at ERA came up They were building ERA Global, and so they were looking for someone to basically, build this out. And I thought that this was a great way for me to enter the VC world and to, combine my experience globally and, dealing with also companies at the ecosystem level and interest in the space to basically run that.
I appreciate that. No, I enjoy your story, and I'm glad you shared it because there are, there are people of all different backgrounds, right? Trying to figure out how to get into venture capital and saying, hey, it might not be a fit or it might be a fit, but at the same time, some of the things that you mentioned is you kind of never know, right? In terms of your background, where what fund or organization or even the idea of you are a venture capitalist at an accelerator, right? Like that's like people don't think of that. You are an investor, and then also the impact component you mentioned is really important. You are helping shape early stage early stage companies that hopefully become larger companies, and that that supports the development of economies and can be a form of international development. So it's a way to make that impact. I wanted to shift back to your program, and you had just started an initiative in the global programs at ERA. Can you share a little bit about that initiative?
Oh, sure. Super exciting. This is actually, I'm very excited about that, guys. But we actually, in light of, recent events and the pandemic and travel bans and blah, 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 I don't need to go on and be more grim. But so we thought that, this is a way, there is a way for us to continue to do the work that we're doing. And, we are in technology. So technology should sure help us to continue to do what we're doing. So as a result of that, yesterday, actually, we launched the ERA Global Insights program. So that is a free 6-week fully online program for companies, global companies all over the world that are interested in learning about the US market. So the whole idea behind that is that, there are a lot of companies out there that are, they are working hard. They are thinking about growing, expanding, globally. They might be thinking about the US. They might not be sure. But, coming to the US is definitely not a cheap endeavor. And so the idea with the Insight program is to really 3 things. Number one, democratizing access to our content. We like to think that, ERA, being the first accelerator in the US, in New York, we're seeing quite a few, use cases and companies, and we have acquired quite some experience and expertise. And we think that companies should have the right to get access to that. And it's our duty to kind of like give that back as well. And number 2, we also want to continue to support companies globally. And 3, like I said, it's from a business standpoint, it's not a cheap endeavor to come to the US. So we want to create that, we want to be a bridge for companies that might be thinking about the US and aren't sure and want to get literally insights and tools and resources about the US. So it will be a 6-week program. So every week there are different activities, so webinars, workshop, one-on-one with the team, to kind of like understand what is that companies need to have to basically be in the US, and are they ready? And at the end of the program, it's kind of like up to them to figure out if, when is the right time for them. And so it's very geared toward being an educational program, but ultimately, we will run an application program. So the program is currently, we're taking applications, and we'll take companies that we think, could obviously down the line could actually come to the US, because it's ultimately, otherwise it'll be, it will be nice for them to see. But if there is the product is not necessarily fit for the US, then that might not be the right fit. But ultimately, we want to make sure that we create a channel for companies all over the world to kind of like see what it takes to be in the US.
Great. So I'm excited that you just launched this program. How do individuals find out about that program? So I will switch to.
Absolutely. So the website is actually, so we have a brand new ERA, and so I'm gonna have you go on a different
Sure.
website. So it's ERA NYC Global.
Yep.
That's also new website that we launched. So a lot of launch lately. So ERA NYC Global. And if you go on the news, if you scroll down the page, there is a news section.
Got it. So I'll pull that up so that our audience sees that. Let's share that for them. So if you're interested in the program, definitely check out. It's you said it's eranycglobal.com, and you can check out the Iynna's program, then and sign up for if you're a company from outside the U.S. and looking to come to the U.S. Great initiative, helping them, especially in this time, with a free 6-week program. That's amazing. In order to help these companies think about how they may venture over here once all of this opens up. So it's we're gonna need some jumpstart, and you're doing that. So that's great.
Thank you.
So Iynna, so I wanted to thank you for joining us today. Again, for those watching, Iynna Halilou, that she is the global programs manager at ERA. And if you want to know more, check out the link to the website. Again, it's eranycglobal.com. Again, this is Rebel One Live. We'll be interviewing investors and founders every week from at 7 p.m. on Thursdays and 10 a.m. on Tuesdays. And come check us out for more. But thank you, Iynna, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This